Hello, hello. Am I audible? Am I audible? Hello,
Good afternoon. Am I visible, Rita? And audible too? Okay.
Richard, some people are unable to join. Please see to it.
But your voice seems somewhat distorted. Am I perfectly audible, Richa? Am I perfectly audible? Okay.
So there are many participants who are joining now. So just let us wait for a couple of more minutes, and after that, I think we can begin.
এখনো অনেকে ঢুকবে।
Joyশ্রী, please begin. Joyশ্rী, are you here? Joyশ্rী? No, she's coming back. She's coming back. Somehow she was not audible. So I've spoken to her. She's coming back. She will begin. She was not audible, that is.
Already 10 minutes left, right? Ten minutes past. 10 minutes past 4. Right.
Yes, we are losing time. Joyশ্rী?
Karna, I think we should start now.
I'm just trying to contact her one more time, and then we will begin. না কিছু শোনা যাচ্ছে না তো। হ্যাঁ কিছু শোনা যাচ্ছে না। হ্যাঁ জয়শ্রী, তুমি বলো। কিছু শোনা যাচ্ছে না, কিন্তু আমরা কিছু শুনতে পাচ্ছি না।
Joyশ্rী, adjust your audio. You have to unmute it.
ঠিক আছে? হ্যালো।
Yes. You can be heard now. শোনা যাচ্ছে, প্লিজ। হ্যাঁ, yes জয়শ্রী, প্লিজ ক্যারি অন।
আমি ল্যাপটপে করছি, আমি তাহলে ইয়েতে চলে যাই।
শোনা যাচ্ছে তো জয়শ্রী?
Probably Joyশ্rী can't hear us.
Seems so. We could see her and hear her also.
Quarter past 4.
Madam Principal, what do we do?
I think you should start.
Okay, since
Yes, there is some communication problem.
Yes. Since there seems to be a problem,
Yes.
I will go straight away into, even though Joyce was supposed to be anchoring this webinar of today, but I'm going straight into welcoming all of you who are participating in this webinar, and of course our respected Madam Principal, who is the speaker today. This webinar is Her Story, Women's Movements in India. And since we have already lost precious minutes, I will not take up any more time, but I will simply request Madam Principal to please begin women's movements in India, past and present. That is her topic. Madam Principal, please.
Thank you, Parna. At the very outset, I must convey my feeling of gratitude to be invited here in this webinar. My sincerest thanks to the Advanced Research Center, Postgraduate Department of English, and the Women's Studies Center of our college. My topic is women's movements in India, past and present. I'm going straight to the topic because I really don't have much time in hand. Political participation of women or their role in the political process has been very marginal. Their presence in the legislative or the decision-making bodies is absolutely scarce, except some Nordic countries like, Sweden, Norway, Denmark, Greenland, Finland, Iceland, etc. Women in general are apathetic to politics compared to their male counterparts because of women's very low socioeconomic status, lesser exposure to education, narrow parochial political culture imposed on them, and a significantly unhealthy political environment which tends to protect or somewhat strengthen gender inequality. The above picture regarding the political participation of women is particularly true of the political system prevailing in the third world countries. And India perhaps is no exception in this regard. But one unique feature of India is that it's a country of contradictions. At the heart of such contradictions stand Indian women. They are among the most oppressed in the world, and yet they are among the most liberated and the most articulate. The question which haunts us is, can these two polar realities play any positive role in making our women vibrant or dynamic or participative? During long 16 years, India had a woman as the Prime Minister. Since 2004, for the next 10 years, the ruling party high command was a woman. From 2007 to 2012, our president was a woman. From 2009 to 2019, the speakers of the Indian Lok Sabha for 2 consecutive terms were 2 women. From 2017 to 19, our defense minister was a woman. Now she is the finance minister of India, and that too for more than a year. Yet, we find increasing incidents of violence and discrimination against women. A casual visitor to any Indian city will find hundreds of women working in so many prestigious positions: doctors, engineers, professors, scientists, lawyers, journalists, and whatnot. And yet, our newspapers are full of facts and figures of violent incidents against women, of rape, of sexual harassment, of socioeconomic exploitation, and even of murder. To have women in very high offices of the state and at the same time to have extreme violence against women, these are merely 2 ends of the same scale. Probably a more complex reality lies in between. And in the perspective of such a pattern of political participation of our women and their social status, we would like to discuss women's movement in India. First, we will discuss women's participation in the freedom movement. It is widely acknowledged that the battle for Indian freedom was fought as much by women as by men. The unthinkable dedication and adorable devotion to the service of the nation on the part of a number of such great female freedom fighters undoubtedly deserve special mention. The first incident of female participation in Indian freedom movement, I should mention that I have taken help for preparing this paper. I have taken help of a number of books, journals, some documents from different archives, and also my own book, Gender Disparity in India, Unheard Whimpers, published by Prentice All India, and in the year 2016, more or less a recent book. So the first incident of female participation in Indian freedom movement is said to have started in the early 19th century, in 1817 to be more specific, when Vimabai Holkar, daughter of Yashwant Rao Holkar, the Maharaja of Indore, courageously struggled against the British Colonel Malcolm. At the Battle of Mahidpur in the year 1817, she led a brigade of 2,500 cavalry and ultimately defeated Malcolm in a guerrilla warfare. Rani Channamma of Kittur, she was the queen of a princely state in southern India, led an armed rebellion against the British East India Company in 1824. She resisted against the British force vehemently, but was arrested quite unfortunately. In the famous Sepoy Mutiny, 1857, a lot of women actively took part. Rani Avantibai, who was also known as Avanitbai Lodhi, wife of Vikramaditya Sen, the ruler of the Indian state Ramgarh in the Mandla district of Madhya Pradesh, Rani Jindan Kaur, the youngest wife of Maharaja Ranjit Singh of Punjab, Begum Hazrat Mahal, the first wife of Nawab Wajid Ali Shah of Awadh, Rani Lakshmi Bai of Jhansi, the second wife of Raja Gangadhar Rao, the ruler of Jhansi. All these brave ladies' courage inspired many Indians to rise against the alien rule. This is the story of the 19th century. We will shift over to the 20th century and we will point out the pattern of women's political participation in Bengal. We will start by it. Swadeshi movement emanated from the partition of Bengal in 1905, continued up to 1908. It was a successful economic strategy to remove the British Empire from power and improve the economic conditions of the Indians to following the principles of Swadeshi, or self-sufficiency. The strategy attracted men and women equally. I would request you to remember the very famous novel of Tagore, Ghare Baire, or The Home and the World, published in the year 1916. In which Bimala, the young wife of Nikhilesh, was so very, influenced and inspired by Shondip, the childhood friend of, Nikhilesh, and particularly Shondip's Swadeshi initiatives actually attracted Bimala a lot. Women joined men to protest the British rule by boycotting foreign goods and buying only Swadeshi goods, that is, goods produced in Bengal only. Srimati Noni Bala Devi, she was the first revolutionary woman of Bengal. She joined the new Jugantar party, which was dedicated to this aggressive movement. At a village called Jenokand in the district of Murshidabad in Bengal, as mentioned by B.S. Chandrababu and L. Tilagavati in their book Woman, Her History and Her Struggle for Emancipation, published in the year 2009, about 500 women met to protest against the government's decision to partition Bengal. They also insisted the local villagers for using indigenous country-made goods. Women in their localities organized Swadeshi meetings and popularized the introduction of charka, that is spinning wheels, among women, and not only among women, among men also in the households. A number of female organizations were formed centering around the Swadeshi movement. Among them, Mahila Shilpo Samiti, Bharat Stree Mahamandal. Bharat Stree Mahamandal was founded in the year 1910, founded by Sharola Devi. This Sharola Devi was the niece of Rabindranath Tagore, a very famous niece. She was the younger daughter of Rabindranath's elder sister, Sharna Kumari Devi. These were quite prominent. As the secretary of the newly formed organization, Bharat Stree Mahamandal, Sharola worked tirelessly and successfully and finally instituted branches of the Bharat Stree Mahamandal in Allahabad and Calcutta. In 1905, Shurit Samiti, a secret revolutionary organization, was revitalized by the immense efforts of Sharola Devi. During the Swadeshi period, she opened the famous Lakshmi Vandar for popularizing the Swadeshi goods. She also initiated certain tentative steps to organize a potent women's movement. In Punjab, the partition of Bengal infused a new spirit of patriotism among its women. Srimati Sushila Devi of Sialkot, Har Devi of Lahore, Purnima Devi of Hisar, and Agyavati of Delhi, they were very noted freedom fighters. In Tamil Nadu, centering around the Swadeshi issue, a women's magazine was started by Kamala, wife of Indian Christian social reformer Stalinathan. A Brahmin widow home was founded in 1913 by Subbalakshmi Ammal, and Mahila Shiva Samaj was set up in Mysore in the same year, that is in 1913. One of the women participants in the Swadeshi movement in Tamil Nadu was K.P. Sundarambal. Apart from being a famous playback singer in Tamil films, she was a great lover of freedom movement. In a number of cities of Tamil Nadu, Muslim women belonging to upper class formed several local Muslim women's associations in the early 20th century. The Begum of Bhopal organized the All India Muslim Women's Conference as early as in 1916. Madam Vikaji Kama was influenced by Dadabhai Naoroji. She was a Parsi woman, Parsi of Bombay, and she was a sound source of inspiration for the Indian youth living in the United Kingdom. She unfurled the first national flag at the International Socialist Conference in Stuttgart in Germany in 1907. She organized the Free India Society and started to publish the journal Vande Mataram to spread her revolutionary thought. Asubai Savarkar, she was the sister-in-law of the great revolutionary Vinayak Damodar Savarkar, secretly organized the branches of Abhinav Bharat under the disguise of Atmanishta Yukti Samaj to avoid the British government's attention. She organized the people and walked underground in order to avoid arrest. Annie Besant Irish by birth, was a strong supporter of India's struggle for freedom as well as Irish struggle for freedom. She founded in 1916 the Home Rule League in Madras. Now we will discuss the contributions made by some Gandhian women who were basically influenced by the principles of Mahatma Gandhi. Gandhi returned to India from South Africa in 1915 and took up the demand for self-rule and eventually the non-cooperation movement of 1920 to 22. Sarala Devi, this Sarala Devi is different, I must mention. This is not Rabindranath's niece, Sarala Devi. She actually was from Orissa, this Sarala Devi. And she was a feminist, socialist activist, and a writer. She actually was very, vocal and very active in the non-cooperation movement led by Gandhi. She then, Muthu Lakshmi Reddy, Sushila Nayar, Rajkumari Amrit Kaur, Sucheta Kripalani, and Aruna Asaf Ali all actively participated in the non-violent non-cooperation movement. Mahatma Gandhi's wife, Kasturba Gandhi, Pandit Nehru's mother, wife, and elder sister, Swarup Rani, Kamala Nehru, and Vijay Lakshmi Pandit, respectively, all participated in the non-cooperation movement. Ladurani Jutse and her three fearless daughters, I should say, Manmohini, Shama, and Janak, they led the movement in Lahore. Some of the important women who played very crucial roles in the Gandhi and Purna Swaraj movement were Dr. Sarojini Naidu, Srimati Urmila Devi, the widowed sister of Siyar Das, then Srimati Bashanti Devi, the wife of Siyar Das, Bai Amma, the mother of the Khilafat leaders, Maulana Muhammad Ali and Maulana Shaukat Ali, Srimati Durgabai Deshmukh, Srimati S. Ambujammal, Krishnabai Ram of Madras, and many others. While selecting his followers in the Salt March in March 1930, Gandhi excluded women for safety initially. But nationalist women vehemently expressed their objection to such a gender-based selection and forced Gandhi to permit them too to take part in the march. Thousands of Indian women got an impetus as well as inspiration from Sarojini Naidu's active participation in the movement. Salt protest became really successful in the full-fledged participation of Indian women who, apart from making salt, took active part in selling and buying salt in open marketplaces as well. Sarojini Naidu's influence on Indian women has ever been vibrant. Women of all classes and all walks of life, even traditional homemakers and the so-called uneducated women joined the freedom movement. They moved from house to house, collecting clothes, medicines, and other donations, courted arrest, and were even imprisoned in distant jails. All this clearly depict that there was nothing which could really prevent them from moving beyond their traditional roles. In August 1942, the Quit India movement was launched. Usha Mehta, a Gandhian freedom fighter, set up an underground radio station known as the Congress Radio or the Secret Congress Radio or Voice of Freedom. Usha, along with some of her associates, close associates, started this radio on August 14, 1942. After a period of 3 months, the police arrested them and put them into jail. Matangini Hasra, she was just Gandhi's age. She was born in the same year, 1869. And she was popularly known as Gandhi Buri. She was an active revolutionary, taking part in Gandhi's civil disobedience movement in 1932. She was shot dead by the British Indian police in front of the Tomluk police station on 29 September 1942. The list of great women whose names have gone down in history for their dedication and undying devotion to the service of freeing India is a long one. There are numerous women who bravely fought for India's freedom with their true spirit and undaunted courage, and not withdrew for a single moment, even when faced brutal tortures, excruciating exploitation, and hardships to earn us freedom, and freedom that we enjoy today without making the simplest sacrifice. Now I will switch over to the post-independence women's movement, and the first of such movements is the Tibhaga movement. Tibhaga movement, it was basically a major peasant upheaval in Bengal and later in West Bengal, because it started in the pre-independence period in 1946, 47, and later it became popular in 1948, 49. And it was largely led by women. It failed after tremendous sacrifices by sharecroppers and their allies, the landless laborers and petty artisans. That it was, participated by a number of women of Bengal is evident from an incident. The then Land Reforms Commissioner of West Bengal, Mr. Debabrata Bandyopadhyay, had published two anthologies titled From Tibhaga to Operation Barga and From Santhal Rebellion to Operation Barga. For the release of the first book, that is From Tibhaga to Operation Barga, the village Khanpur in West Dinajpur district was chosen, where during the Tibhaga movement on February 20, 1947, 22 persons, including a number of women, were killed in police firing. A meeting was organized under a big banyan tree near which most of the bodies of the victims fell on that day, that is February 20, 1947. The book, however, was going to be released in late 1979 after a long gap of 33 years. Syed Mansoor Habibullah, the then Speaker of the West Bengal Assembly, and Bina Chaudhuri, the then Land Reforms Minister of West Bengal, where they were present along with a couple of activist leaders of the Tibhaga movement. There was a very large gathering of the village poor at the meeting. As the meeting progressed, an elderly lady, slightly lame, wanted to meet the minister to give him something. Mr. Bandyopadhyay took her to the minister. The lady then untied a corner of her sari and produced 5 empty bullet shells of .303 rifles, which she had collected from the field after the firing was over and the police had left. That is, long 33 years ago. Her father died of bullet injury. She was in the forefront when a bullet had grazed her skin, making her slightly lame. She was a girl at that time. While handing over the empty shells, she told the minister that she was happy because what her father died for was being realized by this lady that day. The minister took her to the podium and requested her to repeat what she had told him a couple of minutes ago. She repeated. And then the minister showed the empty shells to the audience. There was a thunderous response from the crowd. Now I will discuss some of the movements from the 60s to the 90s of the last century, that is 20th century, which are termed by political sociologists as the new social movements. And in such new social movements, including movements centering around a number of women's issues and ecological movements, etc., Indian women's concerns and participation are notable. Both have come to a head in the late 1960s and the early 1970s and gathered momentum by the 1980s onwards. In fact, by the 1960s, it was evident that many of the promises of independence were still unfulfilled. Thus, throughout the 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s of the last century, we saw a speed of movements in the, in India, campaigns against rising prices, movements for land rights, peasant movements, or women's protests against too much consumption of alcohol by the male members of their families, particularly their husbands, and so on. And everywhere, in various movements that were sweeping the country, women participated in large numbers. Everywhere, their participation resulted in transforming the movements from within. This was quite expected because since at least from the medieval times, women have been subjected to abject male and societal domination. Due to the lack of enforcement, even equal inheritance right and alimony in case of divorce enjoyed by women in the traditional Muslim personal law and the reformed Hindu personal law remain a set of paper rights only. Development process benefits men and women differentially, both in agriculture and industry. Everywhere, men outnumber women in workforce. In the industrial sector, even more strongly and more nakedly. In almost all informal sectors, women are generally paid less for the same work, are less mobile, and are losing control over physical assets. Education, jobs, promotional avenues, and technology. In India, women are a declining gender in number as well. To alter the biased scales of justice, some kind of cultural revolution is perhaps necessary. Women now increasingly realize that sex is only a biological fact, but gender inequality is a conscious construction of the society itself, and hence it should be radically altered. The 1990s have witnessed the 33% reservation for women in Panchayati Raj institutions as a result of the 73rd Amendment Act to the Indian Constitution. Women's organizations and women political leaders of all political parties are fighting for similar reservation for women in the parliament and state legislatures. An amendment bill of 2010 with this objective has largely been supported by people launching the women's movement for their reservation. But some segments of the movement were also worried about these 2 points. Number one, that women candidates might be dominated by the male members of the panchayats because of their too much dependence upon the male members or too much dependence on the male members of the family or in the workplace and so on. And secondly, as a result of reservation, the educated upper caste women only will be elected, thus nakedly depriving the women of the underprivileged sections. So these are the 2, kinds of skepticism, points of skepticism, or some kind of, reservation, against reservation for women. Next, we will discuss women's movements, which started from the 20th century, basically the environmental movement. Chipko movement was perhaps the first organized environmental movement in India, principally carried out by tribal women and children of a vast area of North India. It was a movement for forest conservation where local tribal women encircled the trees like their own children, refusing the loggers of the contractors to cut trees. The word chipko means to hug or to cling to. This was initiated by the female members of the local rural folk when all non-violent legal actions had failed to protect the trees. The movement started at the end of the 1960s and the beginning of the 1970s. The Chipko movement was so intensified that even the then Prime Minister of India, Mrs. Gandhi, she finally declared that not a single tree in the region of UP would be touched for the next 15 years. I'm just touching The second important environmental movement which was led by women and which was largely participated by women was Narmada Bachao Andolon or Save Narmada movement. A few years later, since 1985, started Narmada Bachao Andolon, which was basically a women's environmental movement led by Ms. Medha Patkar. She was a noted environmentalist and a follower of Baba Ampi. Baba Ampi was a very noted disciple of Mahatma Gandhi and also a very famous social worker as well. The Narmada is a very important river of southwest India. In Narmada Valley, the ancient civilization and culture were grown up by the Veels and the Gondas, who were the oldest races of Indian civilization. Two large dam reservoirs were planned to be constructed over the river Narmada in Gujarat and Madhya Pradesh, respectively. Medha and her followers inspected the villages which, in their opinion, would be affected most adversely by this project. Many organizations protested against the project, and they all started a mass movement under the leadership of Medha Patkar. In September 1989, at least 50,000 people gathered in Harsud Valley in Madhya Pradesh and raised their voice to ban the project. The third kind of environmental movement in India that was raised by women was a new one, Navdanna movement. It started in the 80s of the last century. It was also known as the Nine Seeds movement. Navdanna or Nine Seeds movement. It was initiated by Vandana Shiva in 1984 and became very prominent since 1987. Shiva is a noted physicist, environmental activist, anti-globalization author, and food sovereignty advocate. It sought to, empower the local farmers to refrain from growing any genetically modified organisms or GMOs on their land and recultivate organic, chemical-free crops. This movement included over 50 lakhs of Indian farmers and created over 65 seed banks all over India. Navdanna fought to eliminate the commercialization of indigenous knowledge, also known as biopiracy. The movement also addressed various other issues in climate change, food security, misapplication of technology in agriculture, etc. The movement created a learning center known as Bija Vidyapit in collaboration with the Schumacher College in the UK, which sought to educate participants in sustainability and ecological principles. Criticizing genetic engineering, Navdanna claimed to be a woman-centered movement for the protection of biological and cultural biodiversity. This mission, the mission of Navdanna basically was to protect the nature and also protect people's rights to knowledge, biodiversity, water, and food. Now let us go back to some days when the emergency was called off in the year 1977. The Indian feminist groups were primarily vocal against the emerging issue of violence against women through rape and dowry death. Women, for the first time, began a process of protest in which the primary target was the state itself. As these protest movements, led by women, were gaining wide popularity throughout the nation, the state was rather forced to alter legislations relating to rape and dowry and make both more and more rigorous. It was indeed a great win relating to, rape and dowry for women who became happy with the changed pieces of legislation relating to women-centric issues. But eventually it became clear to women that since the governmental machinery was not at all sincere in implementing the change laws, the legislative change as such was only an eyewash and hence unable to improve their actual condition. Women have also been found to make strong protest movements against rising prices of essential commodities in Maharashtra and Gujarat. The call for total revolution by Jaiprakash Narayan in the mid-70s of the last century pushed the women to involve themselves in the movement of Nava Nirman. The Self-Employed Women's Association, or SEWA, gives opportunities to women to project themselves in every walk of life. Compared to the pre-independence movements and movements of the 50s, 60s, and 70s of the last century, in the 80s and 90s of the last century, women's movements were more and more organized. Women started taking parts in various organizational and political activities, such as demand for a separate state of Uttarakhand. The demand started since the 1994 and 1990s. And ultimately in 2000, the separate state of Uttarakhand was ultimately formed. Agitations against Bhopal gas tragedy. The actual tragedy took place, as far as I remember, in the year 1984, etc. In 1990s, the Dalit women's movement in India, labeled as a feminist movement, has become quite rich and vibrant. It has become extremely vocal on the deprived Dalit women of our country. Anandi, a feminist NGO based in Gujarat, has been continuously working since 1995 on the empowerment of Dalit women through the acquisition of economic power by them. In 1995, National Federation of Dalit Women, or NFDW, was formed, which forced women's movements in India to address the caste question quite seriously. In 2002, Khabar Lahariya, or Newswares, was created, which was the first newspaper written by and written for the Dalit woman. Now we will discuss, just mention, because of time constraint, we cannot, elaborately discuss it. The post-colonial feminist movement, I'm discussing it because it is associated with three Indian women's names: Gayatri Chakraborty Spivak, Chandra Talpade Mahanti, and Uma Narayan. Post-colonial feminism emerged in the 1990s, particularly during the birth of globalization. It openly points out that the movements of the 20th century and also in the 19th century, such movements to empower and enlighten women, they have multiplied, but they focus only with the promotion of Western values and protection of non-Western women. Chandra Talpade Mahanti has very clearly pointed out it. Mahanti opines that the paternalistic attitude of the Western feminist theorists undermines the power and collective force of women in the global South and ignores the ways in which Western feminism also encourages patriarchy. Uma Narayan has clarified it in her work, and she compares Western feminists' paradoxical obsession, or rather self-contradictory obsession, with the traditional Eastern practices like burqa, parda, sati, etc., thus completely overlooking the widespread Western practices of various kinds of surgery and unhealthy practices like dieting, etc., to give female bodies a slim look. That is, Chandra Talpade Mahanti or Gayatri Chakraborty Spivak or Uma Narayan, they were by no means, they were supporting the Eastern, practices. But at the same time, they have pointed out that there are some Western practices also which are absolutely against women's health. And in this context, we may point out anorexia, which is basically an emotional disorder characterized by an obsessive desire on the part of a woman to curtail their weight. Now we should mention one kind of movement which can be termed as an eco-political movement. Very recently it has started. In West Bengal, since 2006, women have been found to take leading role in the mass agitation against the government's policy of agricultural land acquisition with a view to quick industrialization in the state. In Nandigram of East Midnapur district and in Singur of Hooghly district, the women belonging to the families of the peasants and agricultural laborers constructed barricades against the police with the domestic articles like brooms, knives, sticks, umbrellas, bricks, and so on. In Singur, Mas Taposhi Malik was raped and murdered in December 2006. Mas Malik was an active leader of the Jami Bachao Andolon, or movement for the protection of land. On March 14, 2007, a number of rural women and children were either fatally injured or dead in an open confrontation with the police and also with the CPIM cadres. As a result of a rich and vibrant mass agitation led principally by poor rural women in Singur and Nandigram, industrialization could not even be started in West Bengal. So this is a kind of eco-political movement taking place in West Bengal. My discussion on women's movement cannot end without mentioning a new kind of movement led by women. I term it as literary movement. Protagonist female Indian writers in general and Bengali writers in particular of the 19th century and 20th century provided leadership in this movement. Their instruments of movement were pens and paper instead of swords and pistols. Their media of movement were books and journals in place of posters and pamphlets. Their addressee were thousands and thousands of readers instead of the existing rulers or government. Among the 19th century protagonist female writers of India, we can name Chandabai, Gangabai Yagnik, Sarojini Naidu, Savitribai Phule, that is wife of Jyotiba Phule, Pandita Ramabai, Tarabai Shinde, Lakshmibai Tilak, etc. And among the 20th century protagonist female writers, we can name Ismat Chugtai, Amrita Pritam, Kamala Das, Bina Agarwal, Ishar Jaj Alu Alia, etc., who were quite prominent. Among the 19th century Bengali female protagonist writers, we can name Rashundari Dashi, Sharno Kumari Devi, Rabindranath's elder sister, Rokia Sakhawat Hossain, Kamini Roy, Toru Dutt, Priyambada Devi, Binodini Dashi, Onurupa Devi, Nirupama Devi, Shoilobala Ghosh Jaya, Shanta Devi, Shita Devi, Jyotirmoyi Devi, etc., who through their autobiographies, novels, short stories, poems, and essays have raised their voice of protest against the various issues of social injustice. Among the 20th century female protagonist authors, we get novelists like Ashapurna Devi, Mahashweta Devi, Bani Basu, Suchitra Bhattacharya, Tilottama Majumdar, etc., and poets like Kobita Sinha, Vijaya Mukhopadhyay, Krishna Basu, Mallika Sengupta, and others. For time constraint, I just can't mention lines of their poems or their literary pieces. But as you have, many of you have read some of the pieces by these authors. I just can remember like Kavita Sinha's Ishwar Ke Eve, or Eve Speaks to God. where she becomes very clear in mentioning that women are much ahead of men regarding their knowledge. Krishna Boshu's very famous poem, Me Manusher Lash, where she, mentions a number of, victims of domestic violence. Or Mallika Sengupta becomes very vocal against, the contributions made by a number of homemakers whose tremendous labor remains absolutely unrecognized and unpaid. In her poem, Apni Bolun Marks, she has clarified it. We have come to a conclusion. It is often said that there is no one single cohesive women's movement in the country, but a number of fragmented campaigns. With this, we have started. Activists, however, see this as one of the strengths of the movement, which takes different forms in different parts of India. While the movement may be scattered all over the country, they feel that it is nonetheless a stronger plural force. This is very important, plurality. It is absolutely essential to understand that for an expansive nation like India, changing women's status or bringing about some kind of, equality between the two sexes cannot be made available overnight. After all, women's movements are no magic wand. And whenever they make such movements, whenever they face one step forward, there is every possibility that they will have to face two steps back. As a result, women in India have ample scope for aspiring and dreaming more and more, no matter whether such dreams remain unfulfilled for long or not. As activists never tire of repeating, out of the deepest repression is born the greatest resistance, the richest movement. Although Indian women in general are less participative in politics than men, yet, as I have mentioned, or at least I have tried to mention, that they have been found to participate in not only participate and have also provided leadership in a number of social, economic, political, neo-social, neo-political, and environmental and literary movements in India quite actively. Women's movements here are rich and vibrant, which have taken different forms in different parts of our country. Urvashi Butalia, in her paper, The Women's Movement in India, Action and Reflection, contends that the absence of a single cohesive movement in India, rather than being a source of its weakness, can act as a source of its strength. And although scattered and fragmented movements, women's movements in India are plural. And the more and more plural they are more and more colorful and more powerful. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Principal. I am being privileged to convey thanks to Professor Shuli Shodkar, Principal, Lady Brabourne College, for such an excellent deliberation. It is a memorable journey through words into a thoughtful mind. Now, the session is open for discussion. So we'll discuss the open questions.
You are not audible, Shamhita?
Am I audible, ma'am?
Yes, sorry?
Am I audible, ma'am? Am I audible, ma'am?
For the time being, you were not. Now you are audible, yes.
Okay. I am being privileged to convey thanks to Professor Shuli Shodkar, Principal, Lady Brabourne College, for her excellent deliberation. It is a memorable journey through words into a thoughtful mind. Now the session is open for discussion, and for the lack of time, we will discuss only a few questions.
Sure. Sure.
Here is our message, madam. Thank you, Dr. Sarkar, for your informative presentation. Our
Thank you, sir.
query, Student Kasturba Gandhi also featured as a woman participant of the nationalist or freedom movement. And
Yes.
regarding the Chipko movement, Sundarlal Bahuguna's name could perhaps be mentioned for lending support to the rural women he came
Yes.
across as the leader of this movement.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. Actually, we are discussing women's movement. So Kasturba Gandhi's name I have mentioned as far as I can remember. And if I have omitted, if I have missed it, I really apologize. But it is true that Chipko movement was basically, led by Sundarlal Bahuguna, but it was participated strongly and widely by women and children of the locality, of the villages of Uttarakhand. That time it was not Uttarakhand, because that time the separate state of Uttarakhand was not yet formed. So basically it was led, the leadership was provided by Bahuguna. Actually, if time permitted, I should have mentioned it, that in Narmada Bachao Andolan, the leadership was provided by a woman, and the mass, that is, it was widely participated by men and women equally. But in Chipko movement, the leadership was provided by a man, Sundarlal Bahuguna, absolutely. And it was participated by women and children. And women, actually, they treated the trees like their own children, because trees were the main source of their livelihood. Without trees, they can't eat, they can't drink. So for their, household consumption, tree is the main source. So they wanted to protect trees, to protect the environment by all means. So women's participation here should be wide, and it was wide, no doubt about it. Yes, the leadership was provided by a man. Any other question?
Madam. Yes, ma'am. Here is another query. Could you please comment on the fact that women's movement in the present day do not become quite pan-Indian due to existence of politically supported gender discriminatory system like Khap Panchayats in North India?
Yes, in India, it is true that women are dominated by men in almost every walk of life, no doubt about it. And I have probably, if you can remember, I have started with this, that Indian women, they are the, embodiment of contradictions. They are among the most oppressed and among the most liberated. And if they were not liberated, how in so many movements they have provided leadership and they have participated so widely. It is true. But in support of women and women's movement, it can be said that in Gandhian movements like civil disobedience movement, Salt March, Quit India movement, etc., a number of movements, including uneducated homemakers of every ordinary family, took part. In Tebhaga movement, women's participation was, absolutely significant. And families, they arose from families of landless peasants. So women of very uneducated and, penniless families, they emerged. In the new social movement centering around the issues of price hike or consumption of liquor by the male members of families, or utter exploitation and oppression of women by men in the families, a large number of scheduled caste, scheduled tribe, other backward castes, and BPL family women raised their voice of protest. This is true. In the environmental movement also, like Chipko movement, for example, rural poor women folk of the underprivileged sections of Raini village in Uttarakhand and later different other villages of Uttarakhand, they have taken active parts because trees were really the main source of their livelihood. In Dalit women's movements, which arose during the 90s of the 20th century, the women belonging to the poorest of the poor, they became vocal. In Mahashweta Devi's quite a few novels and stories like Draupadi and others, you can find this. The tribal Dalit women folk who were totally oppressed by the male upper caste strata of the society, they were oppressed. And so not only the, women of the poorest of the poor, they participated widely, but a number of educated women by writing literary pieces like Krishna Basu, Mallika Sengupta, Kobita Sinha, Mahashweta Devi, Ashapurna Devi, etc. They also, sharpened their pens to protect these women. So I think it has now become pan-Indian. Now it has become pan-Indian. And India is really a land of contradictions. Really, some of the women are among the most oppressed and some are, they have been found in large numbers to raise their voice of protest.
Thank you, madam. We will meet tomorrow at the same time for our next session. Was there a feminist movement in colonial India by Dr. Aparna Mukhopadhyay? Till then, stay safe, take care, and bye. Namaskar.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.